Welcome back to The Truth About the Market, where we cut through the noise and talk about what's really happening in aviation, not the hype, not the headlines, but the truth. I'm your host, Jason Zilberbrand. I'm president of VREF. I've appraised just about everything from vans to 777 VIPs for clients that range from the FAA and SpaceX to celebrities, billionaires, as well as the industry's largest fleets you've definitely heard of. And most importantly, I've owned, sold, and operated my own aircraft, and equally important, this podcast is sponsor-free, no commercial paid-for opinions, no spins, just the unfiltered truth. And today's episode is an important one, not controversial, not inflammatory, because this isn't really about engines, and it's not even really about valuations. But it is about what happens when people with no aviation experience, who aren't pilots or owners or brokers, much less appraisers, begin publishing conclusions that influence aviation decisions and then disclaim all responsibility for the consequences. And in aviation, consequences aren't theoretical. They're mechanical, they're financial, and sometimes they're fatal. So let's start with the only rule aviation has ever cared about. Safety comes first, always. Safety of flight, safety of flight, safety of flight. It's not price. It's not convenience. It's not a model or an algorithm. It is just safety. And everything else, maintenance, valuations, underwriting, insurance, financing, it all exists to support that single principle in our industry, which is why aviation is different from every other asset class. Aircraft are not spreadsheets. They're operating machines that carry human beings, and when that reality gets ignored, bad things happen. So let's start with the claim that started this all. And it's pretty obvious because everyone knows an engine overhaul adds value. That's not controversial. It's not debatable. Hell, my 8-year-old son understands that. So if someone tells you overhauls don't add value, you can stop listening to them immediately. That's not the argument here. The real problem, and the reason for this episode, is what happens when people who don't fly, don't own an aircraft, don't transact an aircraft, start publishing conclusions about aircraft values using abstract data and calling it insight because aircraft are not spreadsheets. They're operating assets. And when you ignore that, people are going to lose real money. So what started this? Recently, an article circulated suggesting that aircraft owners should think twice, or outright avoid, overhauling engines prior to the sale because they don't recover their full cost. Let's be clear, no professional disputes that you don't always recover 100% of an overhaul, but I can show you hundreds, if not thousands of times that you do. That has been true forever. It is not new information. It's not insight. Anyone making a claim otherwise is a straw man. Look, even though these numbers feel objective, they aren't automatically truthful. How numbers are used depends on the choices the person analyzing them makes. If you only include certain examples and ignore others, or leave out failures, the results can be badly misleading even if the math itself is correct. This is called selective sampling. By choosing what data to look at and what data to ignore, someone can make numbers support almost any conclusion they want. In real life, especially in areas like aviation, where many deals fail or never finish, looking only at successful outcomes gives a distorted picture. The numbers may look precise, but they don't tell the whole story unless all the relevant data is included. And the real problem is what happens after that statement, when abstract data gets turned into implied advice by people who don't understand aviation under the guise of statistics. So, why who is speaking matters. Here's where this stops being an academic discussion. It starts becoming genuinely dangerous when someone with no aviation background, not a pilot, not even an owner, not even someone who spent time in the back seat, not even someone who spent time in the right seat, they frame aircraft maintenance decisions as purely financial efficiency questions. They strip out the one variable aviation is never treated as optional, and that's risk. Aviation does not operate on theoretical optimization. It operates on risk management. Engines are not abstract dollar figures. They are not interchangeable widgets. They are living, wearing mechanical systems operating under heat and stress and vibration and time. Every hour flown changes the risk profile of the aircraft. That's why engines represent far more than money. They represent reliability. Is this aircraft going to start? Is it going to run? Is it going to complete my mission? Dispatch reliability. Can the aircraft be used as intended without constant deferrals? Insurance eligibility. Whether underwriters will even quote the risk. Financing eligibility. Will a lender accept the aircraft as collateral? And finally, safety margins, the buffer between normal operation and a mechanical event. When those factors are reduced to a simple question of percentage recovery, the analysis becomes not just incomplete but misleading, and that matters because inexperienced owners are listening. They don't hear nuance. They hear permission. Permission to defer maintenance. Permission to fly marginal equipment longer than they should. Permission to believe that safety decisions are optional if the spreadsheet says so. Folks, that's not how aviation works. Experienced aviators, well, they understand that maintenance decisions are never purely economic. They are layered judgments balancing cost, risk, mission profile, financing realities, and above all, safety of flight. And when non-aviators publish conclusions without understanding that balance, they aren't just missing context. They are unintentionally encouraging behavior that aviation has spent decades trying to eliminate. And that's why who is speaking matters just as much as what is being said. Did you know VREF does more appraisals than anyone else in the market? With thousands of aircraft appraisals completed every year, why trust anybody else? Go to vref.com to learn more. So, how does this translate into the real world and real world risk? Well, here's what's actually happening in the real market, not in theory, not in spreadsheets, but in live transactions with real people and real aircraft. See, a neophyte owner reads a headline or a summary that says, "Don't overhaul. You won't get your money back." What they don't read is everything that happens downstream from that decision. See, they don't read that overdue engines routinely kill financing. They don't read lenders don't just look at book value, they look at risk. Engines near or past TBO narrow the lender pool dramatically. I've talked about this in the past, and it's not anything but common sense, right? Because in some cases, if your engine is past a TBO, it can eliminate a buyer pool entirely. They don't read that marginal engines raise insurance premiums or restrict coverage. Underwriters price risk, not optimism. And higher time engines, especially without strong maintenance narratives, often mean exclusions, higher deductibles, or outright declines. They don't read that weak engines collapse deals during pre-buys. Findings don't need to be catastrophic to be deal killers. Compression trends, oil analysis, borescope results, all of it becomes leverage and not in the seller's favor. They don't read that deferred maintenance compounds risk. Every hour flown on a marginal engine isn't neutral. It increases exposure mechanically, financially, and operationally. They don't read that an aircraft will sit unsold for months or years. Bleeding carrying costs while owners wait for the right buyer who never shows up. And most concerning of all, they don't read that owners end up flying longer than they should, rationalizing risk because the spreadsheet says it's economically efficient. That's not theory. That's the transactional reality professionals see every single day in failed deals, broken negotiations, rejected loans, and aircraft that quietly vanish from the market. And here's the critical part, folks. None of that shows up in a scrape listing data. Failed transactions aren't recorded. Deals that die don't leave a trail. Aircraft that become unfinanceable simply disappear. So when abstract advice ignores those outcomes, it isn't neutral. It's incomplete, and incompleteness in aviation always carries a risk. This episode is brought to you by VREF, the trusted name in aircraft valuations and appraisals. Whether you fly a piston single or manage a business jet fleet, VREF keeps you grounded in data that matters. Visit vref.com to know what your aircraft is really worth before you buy, sell, or finance. So let's talk about why aviation destroys abstract models. Because aviation doesn't break abstract models by accident. It breaks them because aviation is not a normal market. It's thin, it's expert driven, where outcomes are directed by judgment, not volume. Aircraft don't trade like homes or Ford F 150s. They don't trade like cars, and they sure as hell don't trade like stocks. There's no liquidity. There's no efficiency, and there is no forgiveness for bad assumptions. A massive percentage of aircraft that are for sale will never actually sell. You all know this. I preach it. They don't close, they don't transfer, they don't get funded. They just die quietly, and that's the part no model sees. Deals die during pre-buy. When reality meets the inspection report, they fail underwriting. When lenders decide the risk isn't worth the paper, and they fail insurance when underwriters decline or price the aircraft out of reach, or they get renegotiated into oblivion until the seller gives up, or they simply just disappear, relisted quietly, or pulled off the market altogether. These outcomes leave no data trail. There is no record of that deal that almost happened. There's no data set for the buyer who walked away. There's no spreadsheet column for the loan declined. There's no scraped listing for insurance refused. But those failures are the market. They are where pricing is actually discovered. They are where leverage shifts. They are where value is destroyed. An AI model trained only on a handful of successful transactions from one perspective is learning from survivors, not from the wreckage that surrounds them. That's survivor bias at its most dangerous. So when valuation logic ignores failed transactions, it isn't just incomplete, it's blind. Blind to risk, blind to friction, blind to the mechanisms that actually determine whether an aircraft trades or it doesn't. And in aviation, blindness isn't just an academic flaw. It's how people make very expensive mistakes with real aircraft, with real money, and super real consequences. Because marketability is value. And this is where theory collapses and real aviation practice takes over. Professionals don't talk about overhauls in isolation. We talk about marketability, because marketability is what determines whether an aircraft actually trades or it finances or it flies. At VREF, a significant portion of the appraisal requests we receive don't come from sellers trying to justify a price. They come directly from lenders, from the banks and finance companies asking us to support a refi immediately following an engine overhaul. Think about that for a moment. A lender is literally preparing to write a check to an engine shop, and their first call is for an updated valuation. Why? If it's worth nothing. Because lenders don't fund sentiment, they fund reduced risk. A fresh, well-documented overhaul doesn't just add hours, it resets confidence. It restores the financeability of that aircraft. It changes how an underwriter views the aircraft as collateral. Look, if overalls had no value, lenders wouldn't be refinancing them every single day. I think we can all agree on that. But they do, because an aircraft with fresh engines is easier to insure, it's easier to underwrite, it's easier to place in the market, it's easier to exit if something goes wrong, because it's going to attract serious buyers instead of speculative ones. It survives pre-buy scrutiny. It holds together under negotiation. By contrast, an aircraft that is due an overhaul doesn't just suffer a theoretical price haircut. It often gets shoved into a completely different market, one dominated by cash buyers and steep discounts and leverage that never swings back to the seller. That's where sellers get punished, well beyond overhaul cost. So when people argue about whether or not an aircraft recovers 100% of an overhaul, they're asking the wrong question. The real question is whether the aircraft remains financeable, insurable, and sellable at all. That's the difference between a tradable asset and a standard one. It's a value, even if it doesn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet or a chart. Look, you don't get 100% cash back is the wrong question. No serious aviation professional is ever expected to recover 100% of an engine overhaul. That idea is pure straw man. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again, and it's a lazy one, because everyone understands that maintenance dollars are not reimbursed dollar for dollar at sale. That's true for paint and interiors and avionics and engines. It's always been true, and it always will be. So when someone says you don't get all your money back, they're not saying anything insightful. The mistake is what comes next. The implication that because recovery isn't perfect, the overhaul somehow doesn't make sense. That logic just ignores the real alternative. Because if you don't overhaul, you don't just accept a partial recovery, you accept structural consequences that go far beyond a percentage haircut. You're going to risk losing your financing. You're going to risk insurance. You're going to risk months, if not a year, of it sitting on the market with no serious buyers, right? And riddle me this for all you who think that an engine is worth nothing, not that anybody would really, but you go to buy that engine or you go to overhaul that engine in today's market. You're going to wait 6 months. Is that not worth value? You risk deals collapsing in pre-buy when leverage disappears overnight. And in worse cases, you're forced into outright price capitulation just to exit the asset. These outcomes are not hypothetical. They are routine. And here's the critical part. None of those losses show up in a data set. There's no column for the loan decline. I've said that before. So the correct question has never been, do I get 100% back? The real question is, does the decision preserve marketability, financeability, or does it destroy them? And in aviation, imperfect recovery is normal. Loss of options is what's truly expensive. And you know what's crazy is that the disclaimer on this company's website, that ends the argument. And it's my Monty Python moment. So at this point, I'll be honest. The article was so silly, so confidently over the top that I did what any reasonable person would do. I went to their website not to learn more, not to sign up. Hell no. But to answer a very simple question. Who on earth thinks that they can say this out loud and put it in print? And that's when I stumbled into what can only be described as my Monty Python moment. You know, the part where the knight is waving his arms, insisting he's invincible while everything important has already fallen off. Because buried on their own website, not hidden, it's not a secret trapdoor, is the fine print that explains it all. They explicitly state, and I mean, I'm giggling here because it's kind of crazy that they do this, but it literally does say this on their website, that they do not provide valuation services, advisory services, appraisals, financial advice, professional opinions of any kind, which immediately raises the question, then what exactly was the article supposed to be? Performance art? They then go on to say, you should not rely on their data. You must independently verify everything. You must consult a licensed professional. And then my personal favorite, the punchline. If their conclusions cost you money, their maximum liability is the greater of whatever you paid them, or $100. That's it. That's the whole castle. $100 hamburger. You can lose 6 figures on an aircraft transaction listening to these bozos, and their exposure is basically lunch money. And at that point, curiosity got the better of me. I tried calling them. No answer, no return call, no discussion, which is when it all clicked. This isn't insight. It's authority cosplay. They want to sound like experts, be treated like experts, and influence decisions like experts, while legally insisting they are absolutely definitively not experts. And that's the moment you realize, aha, we know what you are now. All right, cue the Monty Python music. In all seriousness, it's authority without responsibility. This is the real issue, and it has nothing to do with engines or algorithms. It's about authority without responsibility. What's being presented looks like expertise. It sounds like guidance. It's shared. It's quoted. It's consumed as insight. People read it the same way they would read advice from a professional who spent years inside the industry. But none of the obligations that normally come with that authority exist. There is no licensure behind it, no professional standard, no duty of care, no accountability if someone acts on the conclusion and gets hurt financially or worse. The influence is real, but the responsibility has been intentionally engineered out of the system. That structure might be acceptable if the product were clearly positioned as background analytics or raw data meant to support experienced decision makers. In that context, the limitations are obvious, and then the risk would be understood. The problem is when those limitations disappear in practice and the output starts being framed as guidance, especially in aviation, where decisions are safety and safety critical, and consequences compound quickly. And in this industry, authority has always come with responsibility for a reason, because judgment matters, context matters, experience matters, and so does accountability. When someone wants the reach and credibility of expertise without accepting the obligations that come with it, what are they producing? It isn't insight. It's just content. And in aviation, confusing content for judgment is how people make expensive mistakes, and sometimes far worse ones. So let me be very clear about this, because I think it matters. This isn't an argument against AI. Used correctly, AI can be a powerful tool. It's excellent in organizing information and identifying patterns and helping professionals move faster through large data sets. The problem begins when AI is treated as a substitute for judgment instead of support for it. The number of mistakes that I see AI make is insane. If you're trusting it, you're insane. Aviation doesn't run on correlations alone. It runs on experience. It runs on an understanding of risk and safety culture, right? The FAA is a great safety culture, lender behavior, insurance thresholds, and the human dynamics that determine whether a deal actually survives contact with reality. AI doesn't understand that. AI can't understand why one bank will fund one aircraft and another one won't. It doesn't understand why two identical airplanes can have wildly different value outcomes. It doesn't understand why a deal that looks perfect on paper collapses the moment a pre-buy starts. And that's not a failure of its technology. It's a failure of its assumptions. Because when AI is built without any master, especially if we're talking about aviation domain, if there's no master, it starts shaping aviation decisions with broken information, with broken direction. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's processing the inputs, and those inputs are wrong. The danger isn't AI. The danger is mistaking computation for judgment in an industry where judgment has always been the difference between success and failure. In aviation, tools don't replace experience. They either support it or they expose the cost of ignoring it. If you're tired of guessing about aircraft values, try VREF Online. Real-time data, quarterly updates, and over 900 models at your fingertips. From residual value forecasts to real depreciation trends, it's the only platform trusted by every lender, insurance company, and broker worldwide. Subscribe today at vref.com and start making decisions based on facts, not feelings. So, the only honest answer, here's the answer that real aviation professionals already understand and have always understood. Engine overhauls, they add value, not in some abstract, guaranteed dollar for dollar way, but in the way that actually matters in aviation, by restoring confidence and reducing risk and keeping the aircraft viable in a real market. No one expects to recover 100% of the cost of anything. That's never been the standard. Maintenance isn't an investment vehicle. It's a risk management decision. Sometimes overhauling before a sale is the right move. Sometimes it isn't. The difference depends on the aircraft, the mission, the buyer pool, the financing environment, the condition of everything around the engines. Context always matters more than averages. What never changes is priority. Safety comes first, not because it sounds good, but because aviation has learned repeatedly and painfully what happens when it doesn't. See, and Murphy's Law is at play here. And there's no two deals that are the same. Everything is a one-off, and you'll learn from it. There's no universal rule you can apply to every aircraft and every owner and every market cycle. Anyone claiming there isn't simplifying the truth. They're misunderstanding the business. Aviation doesn't reward shortcuts. It rewards judgment, and with experience and respect for risk, put your time in. Right? That's the only honest answer. In aviation, value isn't theoretical. It lives where safety, finance, insurance, and reality intersect. So, this episode wasn't a rejection of technology. It was a defense of judgment, because in aviation, abstraction doesn't just fail quietly. It fails expensively, and sooner or later, the bill always comes due. In the next episode, we're going to go where most conversations stop, into the parts of aviation that don't fit neatly into models or marketing decks. We're going to talk about foreign trusts. We're going to talk about sanctions, compliance risk, what really happens when markets tighten and the rules start to matter again. If you're buying, selling, refinancing, or simply trying not to make a very expensive mistake, reach out. The cost of good judgment is small compared to the cost of learning the hard way. If today's conversation helped you see the market differently, please do me a favor. Share this episode and subscribe. And remember, when you need accurate, defensible, and data-driven aircraft values, there's only one name in the business: VREF. Visit VREF.com to get started today. Thank you for listening. I'm Jason Zilberbrand, and this is The Truth About the Market. Until next time, fly safe and stay smart.